call this meeting to order. Madam Clerk, roll call.
Councilmember Dumont.
Here.
Councilmember Golding. Here. Councilmember Jansen.
Here.
Councilmember Mesa.
Here.
Councilmember Nichols.
Here.
Mayor Hoffman.
Here. So this is a little bit of a different meeting for us. As you probably know, we have one item of business today, and that is to nominate and appoint a council member to seat 3, which was opened on November 7th with the resignation of Councilman Chet Stokes. So what we're going to do today, after we hear from our courtesy of the floor, is we'll open the floor for nominations and then take a vote at that point. We're going to hope for not a tie, because we don't really have a plan for a tie, but city attorney's prepared to advise us as we go on that. But I will go ahead and start the courtesy of the floor to visitors. When I call your name, if you come to the podium, state your name and address, and you'll have 3 minutes to address the council. And we will start with Mary Phyllis. Come on up.
Hi there, I'm Mary Phillips. I live at 934 10th Street North in Jacksonville Beach. A wise person once told me, when you're looking for someone to put into public office, look for a public servant, not a politician. One might wonder, what's the difference? A public servant wants to serve the public who elected him. He will put the people first. A politician wants to serve himself. He will put himself above the people who elected him. You are meeting tonight to nominate someone to fill an open city council seat that was vacated by an individual who was elected to serve the citizens of Jacksonville Beach, but chose to give up that commitment in search of another political office. A gamble that didn't pay off. I do not support returning Chet Stokes to the open at-large council seat. Mr. Stokes gave up on the citizens who placed him in office when he resigned that position to seek another. I no longer have confidence that Mr. Stokes would fulfill the remainder of the term if another or better opportunity presented itself. I would like to see a more dedicated public servant in this seat. I've read the candidate's information that was posted on the city website. As a 30-year resident of Jacksonville Beach, I'm familiar with many of the candidates' names. There are 3 that stand out for their longevity in the community and previous public service to the citizens: Benjamin Rubin, Greg Sutton, and John McGowan. None of these men have asked me to come and speak on their behalf. I would be satisfied if any of these 3 gentlemen were nominated and appointed to fill the vacancy, but if I were voting today, my vote would be for John McGowan. Mr. McGowan has been a committed member of our community for 18 years. He's been involved and engaged as a citizen more than some of our elected officials have been in carrying out their public duties. The one characteristic that Mr. McGowan has demonstrated time and time again is written in the cover letter of his application for this appointment. In that letter he states, "I have held closely to the belief that the office comes before the personal, that we must put the interest of the people we serve above any other considerations." For his dedication to the citizens of Jacksonville Beach and for his belief that the office comes before the personal, I urge you to nominate and appoint John McGowan to fill this vacant seat on the Jacksonville Beach City Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Phillips. Chet Stokes.
Chet Stokes, 142 33rd Avenue South. A little different being on this side, I think. But good to see everybody. Honorable Mayor and council members, tonight I'm seeking to be reappointed to seat 3. 2 years ago, I campaigned for this seat, and the voters chose me to serve. Now I feel I owe it to them and to the city to fulfill the remainder of this term. There's still a lot to accomplish. If the next 2 years are anything like the first 2, will be filled with meetings, workshops, and events. But I'm ready to step in day 1 and get the work done. I'm the only one with experience on the dais, and I've been in the meetings week in and week out. So a lot of time that we spent together working on strategic plan. We got the LDC coming up. Gosh, we did a lot. Charter review, 14 of 16 passed, so I was pretty happy with that. So anyway, there will be no learning curve with me coming in and no training, because we've been doing the work for the last 2 years. And so I think that's a huge positive kind of coming in midterm. For these reasons, feel I'm the most qualified for the job and hope to continue serving with most of you. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, Mr. Stokes. Steve Jarrett.
Hi, my name is Steve Jarrett. I live at 3741 First Street South in Jacksonville Beach. I was born and raised here. Been here all along. And I'm here to speak in favor of Greg Sutton because of his time spent on the Planning Commission and with his experience that we have the Land Development Code getting for whatever we're doing with it. And that, I think, is going to take a lot of insight and understanding about what all those little subtle things. I've been around councils several times where they've rewritten their code, and it gets pretty muddy and it gets pretty thick, and there are some things that can end up in there in the end that have been planted and buried in there by all the lobbying that goes on, and it takes an experienced eye and ear to catch some of that stuff before it becomes law. And I think Greg would be an ideal candidate for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jarrett. Greg Sutton.
Greg Sutton, 47 Tallwood Road, Jacks Beach. Afternoon, Mayor Hoffman and council members. Greg Sutton from the Planning Commission and applicant for the open council seat 3. Thank you for a couple of minutes in which I'd like to summarize my application. Just as a very brief background, I was appointed to the Code Enforcement Board, which we no longer have, by Mayor Marsden and the council back in the early 2000s, and then after a couple of years appointed to the Planning Commission under Mayor Sharp. My track record on the PC has been one of thoroughness, open-mindedness, tough but fair, and striving to reach that careful balance of quality of life with smart economic development. As we know, many of our constituents today are not particularly happy with a number of the items that can and need to be addressed as we modify and modernize our LDC and comp plan. Of note, downtown development. However, I will note we are seeing some very nice quality projects of late. Commercial parking, and more specifically in the CBD, multifamily residential, and in particular townhomes, residential parking, and specifically as that relates to these townhomes and multifamily residential, lot coverage, outdoor dining, and more. As Planning Commissioner, I've had to apply the LDC and the comp plan as it relates to a number of these areas, literally live the application of those two instruments. And quite honestly, it's oftentimes been very frustrating as we are handcuffed and must base decisions fairly based on the code that exists today, which quite frankly is broken in multiple ways. I say that to emphasize the fact that you have the opportunity through your decision today to tap into a breadth of insight and practical experience as we work and consider various changes to the LDC and comp plan, along with the community and our consultant. We can make this better for the community while motivating economic development. From a personal standpoint, I'm a native of Jacks Beach and graduate of Fletcher High School and Jacksonville University. I worked for Florida Blue and its subsidiaries for over 35 years and own and operate a small seasonal business here in Jacks Beach, which is celebrating its 69th year. Most are familiar with my uncle, but my family is deep-rooted here in Jacks Beach, going back to the early 1900s, where my great-great-grandmother, Mary Perkins, worked hard in establishing and running the Perkins Bath House, which was located on the boardwalk just a few hundred feet from where I stand. I'm confident that I am the most qualified to fill this seat at this important time for our city. If you objectively consider my professional background and experience, leadership and decision-making, and 17 years of serving on the city's planning commission, applying our land development code and comp plan, and sort of mirror that opposite the work that's ahead of us, I think you'll come to the same conclusion. You have an important decision in front of you which will help shape our future here in Jacks Beach. Thanks so much for your time and careful consideration, and I stand ready to continue my service to our great community in this new role. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton. Ken Marsh.
Ken Marsh, 2011 Gale Avenue. Not sure exactly what criteria you all are going to use tonight to make this selection. I hope one of the criteria that you do use, though, is who has been here, who has been there for you guys over the many years. And I don't know if I'm bragging or saying that I don't have a life, but I've been to probably well over 100 council meetings, workshops, CRA meetings, and planning commission meetings. And one face that I've seen, and a person that's been participating, has been Gary Paytow. He comes, when he talks, he comes prepared. So you gotta know, you gotta look at some of the detail when you come up in front of these meetings and talk. Gary's been there over many, many years, and of course now he's on the CRA. Second to that would be Mr. Sutton. As he has said, he's demonstrated his professionalism on the planning commission. He's been there over many, many years, and I've seen him in action. He is tough and he is fair. And probably third would be Mr. McGowan, although somewhat controversial. But that said, he's been, over the years, he's been there for the citizens of Jack's Beach. And when you look at what people do in a selfless way, you got to consider that trait. As far as Mr. Stokes and his reelection, it's not, it's not sour grapes, but I've been here I've been in front of you guys, Chris, 10 years. Chet wasn't there before he ran for election, okay? You know it and I know it. But he's stepped up in the last couple of years, he's done an admirable job. But when I talk about longevity and people that have been there, Greg and Mr. Sutton have been there. So I would ask you to strongly consider the three candidates that I just talked about. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marsh. Gary Paytow.
Good evening, Gary Paytow, 725 Bon Air Circle. Mayor, council members. There's a number of interesting challenges that are going to be presented to the city that you're already facing. Number one is the backbone of the city, the residential areas. How are we going to maintain that backbone and assure the strength of this community by improving the residential areas, protecting them against the short-term rentals and other encroachments that are quickly happening? At the same time, there's a fine balance. What do we do to ensure that we encourage developments in the downtown area to bring in the businesses that we really want, the retail, the restaurants, and so forth? You've got somebody standing in front of you who has the experience to do that. I've worked with municipalities, I've served on other boards. I've served this community for the last 5 years continuously, whether it's working with the police department or serving on the CRA and standing here in front of you, the council, or the planning commission, to bring forth the ideas so that we are thinking beyond the edges of the envelope. To be able to move forward, we have to think beyond where we are today. We need to think about the future. How are we going to meet some of your policy priorities, such as sustainability? What are we going to do in reference to long-term improvements in the city, particularly infrastructure and so forth? We have significant issues in the north end of the community. How are we going to get those things fixed and move it forward? I'm here to offer an alternative for someone who can think outside the box and help bring ideas to the table. My ideas aren't necessarily always the best, but I think in working with a very collaborative council, we can really move things forward in this community. And I'd like to be part of that, and I think I can provide you the expertise that goes along with it. Having been an architect, working on the construction side, as well as a project manager, I understand what it takes to get a project done. And I understand the aspects in reference to financing and funding of those projects. So I'm ready to help you given the opportunity. So thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Paytown. That is all of our speaker cards. I do want to thank everyone who applied. It does take courage, but also a desire to help make our city better, to put your name out there like this in a public way. Not quite as much courage as it takes to campaign for the office, but we do appreciate everyone who put themselves out there. And I think one of the things that we all had a consensus on was that we were looking for someone who had some experience, who we could already see serving the city in some way, and that's largely what we got. So several board members, at least one former candidate, and people that have been serving our community already. So it's a really good list, and I'm really glad to see that level of interest. And for anybody who isn't selected, there are plenty of boards if you're not already serving on one, as well as city council elections every 2 years. I do want to add, though, that John Donnelly is no longer living in Jacksonville Beach, so if anybody was planning on nominating him, he is no longer eligible for the position. So I'm going to open the floor for nominations. We'll take all the nominations from council, and then we'll do a vote and see where we are. The floor is open for nominations. Mr. Nichols.
Well, first of all, I wanted to thank everybody.
Actually, let me just say, can we just do the names, and then we'll have comment from council once the nominations are closed? You don't mind?
I can do that.
Thank you.
Chet Stokes.
Thank you, Ms. Holding.
Greg Sutton.
Any other nominations? Mr. Nichols.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Any other nominations? Nominations are closed. Council, questions and comment? Mr. Nichols.
I'll start over. I just want to thank everybody for applying. We had an outstanding list of applicants for this, many of which that I would fully support that was running for office. When I really started looking at this, I had an initial bar that I needed to get over, and that was that the only person that has held this office and had run a campaign, and which is a very, very difficult thing to do, and was elected by the residents of Jacksonville Beach, Ms. Chet Stokes. He knocked on doors, he raised money, he ran a very competitive race against Mr. Marsh, who was also an outstanding candidate at the time. And then, we've recently had 3 seats open and everybody ran unopposed. So, the tough part about being a public servant or elected official is running the campaign. I mean, it is a really, really challenging application process for one, which is something that, the city has done a good job helping people run through. But Mr. Stokes has had a very high level of attendance. He has participated fully, even in the time after he was running for the other office. He stayed engaged, and that's why, I think that I've not been able to get past the first bar with him to analyze everybody on an even scale because of the level that I haven't been able to get past that. But in looking at everybody's applications and the experience and the dedication of the city, we have an incredible amount of people that would all serve diligently and well up here. So I appreciate that, but I'm going to cast my vote for Mr. Stokes to continue in his assistance with the on council. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nichols. Ms. Dumont.
Thank you. I've actually enjoyed having Chet sit on the side. He's a very pleasurable, funny guy. I enjoy his humor, but that's not a qualification to be up here. Mr. Nichols notes that Chet has ran and won for office, but then he ran and lost office. He lost all 3 districts in Jacksonville Beach, so I take the closest election versus the one 2 years ago. I do support Greg Sutton. We were both on planning commission for a while together, and we did not agree on a lot of stuff. But he was always very, he looked deeply into the LDC and the comp plan, and he was extremely diligent in what he did, and what he continues to do as, on the planning commission. One thing that, so when Mr. Stokes ran for office, there was like a flood of stuff. And a lot of that stuff I just pushed aside as, youthful indiscretion, kid stuff, and all of that. But one of them I can't get beyond, and that might be because of my job. I am a college professor, and I know that he said it was an oversight, but this is an oversight that's not forgivable for me, would be for somebody to let people think that he graduated from college. I see too many students work so hard, full-time jobs, sometimes raising kids, so they can walk across the stage and have their bachelor's degree so they can then have a better life. And that's something that, it hit me hard. I just see too many students give it their all. I can't support Mr. Stokes because of that. I know he says it was an oversight, but their intention was that it was okay for people to think that he graduated, and they just worked too hard to be able to make all their credits. So I will put my support behind Mr. Sutton. He has been on the planning commission for 17-ish years. We were on there together for maybe 5 or so years. He understands the LDC, he understands the comp plan, and we have had to sit and make very hard decisions when deep down we want to say no, but we know by the letter of the comp plan and the LDC we're not able to say no. And he understands where all of those issues are within the LDC.
Thank you, Ms. Dumont. Mr. Jansen.
So to your point, Mr. Dumont, we do make a lot of hard decisions, and today we're faced with yet another one, but I feel like being pinned up against some really good candidates is a good, hard decision to have. Better that than trying to find a good candidate. So I have mixed feelings going into this. I supported Chet Stokes in his bid for a state representative. I gave him an endorsement letter. And I know that he was voted by the people. And when you decide to leave office or run for another office, you have to tender a resignation. And there has consequences with that. And I was approached by my wife, and she asked me, she said, if you decided to run for another office midterm, would you expect that the council and mayor would bring you back? So I had to answer that question honestly with myself. And then looking at all the applications, I saw 2 that really stood out to me. One was Greg, and one was Greg Sutton, and the other was Gary Patel. I love them both. The edge had to go to Greg because of his, if you want to call it, time and grade at the beach. He's been around here a long, long time. In fact, I see him every Thanksgiving over at the coach's stand. So I'm faced with a really tough decision here, and I'll cast that vote when we come across the backseat.
Ms. Golden.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with my colleague, Mr. Jansen. We have gotten some really good candidates. I spoke with all the candidates and had really good conversations with all the candidates, and they all bring unique value, would bring unique value to this council. And I was just thrilled to see the quality of the candidates that we got. I am nominating Greg and supporting Greg because he brings a lot to the table with his working or living knowledge of the comp plan and the LDC, having served on the Planning Commission for 17 years. Like Ms. Dumont, I've known Greg for several years and we haven't always agreed on things, but he's always approached his decisions very thoughtfully and reasonably. And I believe he brings the strongest credentials to the table when we are, over the next 18 months, which would be the bulk of this term, the completion of the term, we are going to be updating our comp plan and our LDC. You know, when you think about, I ran a campaign and it's not fun and it's a lot of hard work, but I also went to council meetings for 17 years and was involved as a citizen, and I believe Mr. Sutton's service to our community as a planning commissioner, that service trumps the campaigning, to be honest with you. I don't like asking for money. I have to admit, I enjoyed going door to door because you learn a lot about the community and what's important to people. But for me, Mr. Sutton's service and his knowledge of the Land Development Code and the comp plan trumps, you know, anything that we did in the campaign process. I realize that that the voters did choose Chet, but he resigned, and I do appreciate his interest in representing our community in the House District seat. We do need people that appreciate and can advocate for what we need at the local level. But he chose to do that before his commitment was done here. And for me, that's a deal breaker. I think I personally cannot support Chet for that reason, and I will be supporting Greg Sutton, and I encourage my colleagues to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Golding. Mr. Nichols.
Just wanted to address one thing. Mr. Stokes, having, you know, even though he didn't win the race for the House District seat, he was the only Jacksonville Beach resident running, and he far exceeded. He was the only one from Jacksonville Beach that received votes in that. So I don't think losing seats to people outside of Jacksonville Beach is relevant with this. And then also I go back to the fact that we just had an election. Nobody chose to run for these seats, and we appreciate the applications, but still only one person put in the time, dedication to run for this seat.
Ms. Dumont.
Well, first I neglected to say, we really had great applicants, and you all had fabulous skill sets. I was thoroughly impressed with all of you. I think some are in great positions right now and where you're serving on the boards. Others I know that can go more into that there's so much opportunity with citizen education. So yes, it was a wonderful, what do they call that? A joy of riches. To address Mr. Nichols' piece, I think it's even more telling that the only candidate from Jacksonville Beach didn't win any districts for that House race. So I think that is the part that's more telling, is you'd think that at least his district. Yes, campaigning is hard. Yes, it teaches you a lot, but up here is not campaigning. Campaigning is the show where you get to knock on doors and find out what people are concerned about. Mr. Sutton has been listening to what people have been concerned about for 17 years, not the last 2 years or 3 years if you include the campaign. Like I said, I like Chet. I like Mr. Stokes, but I can't support him for resigning his seat, for letting us be misled about the graduation.
Mr. Nichols, revisit.
One last revisit, and that is also a partisan election where the governor, Governor DeSantis, chose another candidate, and I think that is a reason why Mr. Stokes didn't win these local ones, because it is a partisan election.
Anybody else? Anyone? Any comments? Mr. Mesa.
We've had Since we got elected into office back in November 16 of 2020, we've had some votes on these dais that have been hard. And we have, just like every single one of us here, we have had to make decisions based on the facts that have been given to us. I know we did one last week, and that was another hard one, but like Ms. Georgette, Sandy, and I've talked to our city attorney, we are bound by the law to make certain votes. One thing about politics, it's a nasty game sometimes. I was hoping Mr. Chet Stokes would have won the election, but unfortunately he didn't. I supported Chet Stokes because he was the only candidate from the beaches that was going to represent us in Tallahassee, who lived at the beach and was going to do it, just like Mr. Core Berg, who lived at the beach and understood the beaches. Lost the election. If someone leaves office midterm to run for a higher office to represent a bigger district and they lose and they want to come back, I don't think it should be frowned upon. I don't see it as leaving the people high and dry. Beaches, Atlantic Beach, Neptune Beach, and obviously whatever south of Atlantic Beach, across the Intercoastal, they need representation from someone that is going to speak for them in Tallahassee, and I believe Chet was that guy. Fortunately, DeSantis decided to go for someone else. I'm supporting Chet Stokes because I know he will do another 2 years and do a good job. I know a lot of things that have been thrown at him, been spoken ill of him, and I've gotten to know him personally, so I know he has his heart in Jax Beach. Mr. Gregg, 17 years on the board, and I think he deserves a chance as well, but this is not an easy decision to make up here. So many things I want to say, I just can't wrap my head around it, but I will be supporting Chet Stokes.
Ms. Dumont?
Thank you. I called every one of the applicants and spoke with them. I asked them a set of questions, just like you would in an interview. Unfortunately, they've only heard from one other candidate, one other council person who reached out, proactively reached out to them. Others may have spoken to some of the candidates, but that was because the candidate reached out to the elected official. And up here is a time where you need to do your homework. If you have something that you have to vote on, you need to do your research and your homework and follow through on all of that so you can make the best decision for the citizens of Jacksonville Beach. I was extremely disheartened because I was late in getting through all of them because of work and such, so I finished them up this week on Friday. And so many hadn't heard from, hadn't been contacted by council members. That's very telling. That means that the decision was already made. And that is not how this should work. It's a democracy, it's of the people. We need to be deciding up here what is in the best interest of Jacksonville Beach. And with what we are looking at for the next 2 years, which would be the length of the term, the largest item is the LDC and the comp plan. And we need an individual who knows the LDC and the comp plan. And out of all the applicants, even though they have skills in different areas, which would be useful for different topics, Mr. Sutton is the one that would best lead council and ask the important questions to make sure that the comp plan and the LDC that comes out of that ends up being developed, is in the best interest for the residents of Jacksonville Beach.
Just want to add that there was no prescribed requirement for the council members on how they wanted to handle this appointment. And as you've already heard, a lot of these applicants, I would say most, if not all, are well known to most of us. So just wanted to make sure that you guys heard that. There wasn't any requirement. Everyone could handle this the way that they wanted to handle it. Mr. Mesa?
Yes, I forgot, I wanted to add a couple things. I know last year we hired Sandra Robinson as our city attorney. This dais was 4-3, 4 for her and 3 against her, but it was nothing personal. She's doing a magnificent job. Regardless how the vote goes up here right now, whether it's Chet or Mr. Sutton, I know both individuals will do a good job. So, don't take it personal. Ms. Sandra didn't take it personal. She's doing a really good job, and I appreciate your input all the time. So, thank you.
Any other comments from council? Okay. Madam Clerk, I'm going to have you call roll, and then as your name is called, please state either Stokes or Sutton. Go ahead, Madam Clerk.
Councilmember Dumont,
Sutton?
Councilmember Golding, Sutton, Councilmember Jansen,
Sutton.
Councilmember Meza,
Stokes.
Councilmember Nichols,
Stokes.
Mayor Hoffman.
Sutton. All right, Greg Sutton will be appointed next week on Monday evening. I hope you have it available on your calendar. We have no other business on this agenda. This meeting is adjourned.